This is just a screenshot of the Terraseeding specification. You can find this on our website for download. Anyone's welcome to it. But it really lays out all the steps, just like you would with Hydroseed or anything else that that we'd like to see when you're looking at Terraseeding and specifying. You know, it has a section on growing medium, it has a section on seed quality, it has a section on application, depth, time of year, the things that you need to be asking, a specifier needs to be asking or requiring from a contractor. So again, that is on the website, just www.denbow.com, and very easy to find, and you know, download it if you want to have a look at it closer. We'll just start a little bit with go into research a little bit, as I said before. About 15 years ago is when the compost industry really started to take off here in British Columbia. A little bit before that, the United States was starting to push on using organics for different things, trying to use them for different things, and starting to compost. So these two shots were taken out of some research that was done at the University of Washington, and what they were looking at is just soil health and turf health, and you know, trying to get away from large amounts of fertilizers and kind of going more an organic way in terms of turf care. And what they were doing, and this is again just a snapshot out of PhD research, but what they were doing was looking at incorporating organics, composted organics, into their mix for fertilizing their regiment. And so the top one you can see, you know, they were seeing high runoff, poor turf quality, and you know, the need to use a lot of synthetic fertilizer to keep that vegetation healthy, and a lot of watering. And so they were able to you know, start blending compost with sand for top dressing applications, and that they found they had a lot less runoff and you know, healthier turf. Now again, this is old research. Most of you who are specifying or who are up to date with compost, you know that this is being done on a regular basis. But this research was cutting edge at the time. The next couple slides come out of another program called Soils for Salmon that has been run in the Seattle area for quite a few years, and we've brought some of the ideas up here, and I know there's others too that have talked about using compost in the landscape for stormwater management and that type of thing. But it really has to do with runoff, and I won't go too much in depth, but the far right picture there, you can see that, you know, we're looking at a developed environment, which we're all working in, right? We're continually developing sites and looking at stormwater runoff, surface runoff, and what happens in a really highly developed environment. And of course, we have things like vegetated rooftops that help deal with storm runoff, and we have rain gardens and that type of thing. And organics, you know, soils and things have a big role to play in those areas. Again, out of the same research, just looking at the top organic matter, that top horizon of your soil, and how it interacts. This is an undisturbed environment, you know, kind of before we built, and what do you see? Really healthy soil structure was the big thing. It's really compost, right, that has fallen, things that have fallen from trees, and leaves and branches have fallen and started to decay, and you have this top O horizon of your soil that filters and prevents erosion. And then if you look at the disturbed environment, right, we strip all the topsoil off and we destroy our soil structure. And you know, how do we get that back? We have a lot more surface runoff, we have a lot less infiltration, and a lot of that has to do with the soil structure. So compost is one of those things that we can use to help address that. Again, this was some research that came out of University of Ohio, and it was a PhD research, and they looked at using terraseeding and compost as an application on slopes beside, you know, hydroseed, and then nothing, the control. And you can see in these slides, you know, vigorous growth due to the compost and the terraseeding process. But the next slide shows what happens with stormwater runoff, and how we can treat, every square meter that we treat this way, we can hold stormwater runoff. I think the interesting thing is, if we look at the left side shot, you'll see what they're trying to do here is they were looking at how long it took for water to come off a site after it rained. And intuitively, we know that if a site can hold water and then slowly release it, there's a whole lot less chance that we're going to have problems with erosion. And so what they were looking at is this yard waste compost and terraseeding it on a site, 2 inches or an inch deep. They were looking at it being able to hold a lot more moisture for a lot longer, 3 times longer in this case. And so your site becomes like a sponge, and it's able to hold moisture and then slowly release it rather than this massive flow off when you have rainfall events. On the bottom, I think this is even more interesting from a vegetation point of view, in that the typical feeling in the industry, I know as we do a lot of seeding, and there's a lot of others that do seeding, the typical thought is that, the site, any site is going to be bad for runoff when we first clear it and we don't have any vegetation. But once we get vegetation there, it's going to hold sediment, and we're not going to get the runoff that we'd had day one. What this showed on the bottom snapshot there is that there was a lot of solids loss off of sites. The purple is just the hydroseed or silt fence combination, so really no soil structure. There was a lot of runoff and soil loss on day one, but the second 2 plots there is 3 months. So even after vegetation was grown in, they had a lot of sediment that was coming off the site. Now what the compost site was able to do was able to provide soil structure and really stop the loss of sediment off the site day one, but you can see what happens when there's vegetation grown in the 3-month period, is that it was even better. So that combination of soil structure due to compost and like through the terraceeding process and the vegetation that comes from it was really effective at controlling soil loss and detaining moisture on a site. The same research also looked at compost, what we call a compost blanket, which is not a rolled blanket at all. It's just a layer of compost that's blown on and terraceeded versus rolled blankets. And it showed that terraceeding and that compost layer was more effective at holding sediment and soil on slopes than the rolled blankets that we see often on sites. So very, very interesting. And this kind of shows you a snapshot from the side. One of the things about blowing compost on and the terraceeding process is that you fill all the gaps and you have really good connection or connectivity of the compost to the soil underneath it, as opposed to a blanket where you don't. So we can level that off just like a mulch application where you would level a soil surface off. You can level it off with the terraceeding process. That's why we always say, and you'll see in the terraceeding spec, average depth. So we want to see a 1 inch average depth application. It might be 1.5 inches in some spots depending on the grading plan. But you can see what happens with the vegetation. Interestingly enough, I'll often get questions where people will say, well, if you put 2 inches of compost down and you terraceed it, or 2 inches of soil down and you terraceed it, and the seed is mixed in that whole layer, like what's going to happen to the seed on the bottom? Interestingly enough, the best growth happens from 1 inch or 2 inches down rather than the surface, because that's the seed that is really in the place where it needs to be. It's well aerated, it has all the nutrients it needs, and so we'll see that the growth will happen 2 inches down and then grow up from there. Just a look at what a blower truck looks like. This is a site that we worked on in Whistler for the 2010 Olympics. We terraceeded about 300,000 square meters on that site, so it kind of shows you, every day we're doing jobs that are, 200 or 300 square meters, but the size that it can be expanded to is there. So You can see the product in the back. This is Eco Blanket, so it's that mulch that's made for erosion control. It's being Terraseeded at the time of the install. Show you a picture of a trial, just so you can see how it evolves. This is Eco Blanket on a really steep slope. You can see on the top, a little bit hard to see, but there are rolled blankets there that are being used as a test as well. And so you can see that it's being blown on just with a blower truck seeded at the same time. And you can see it start to green up. This is a week after. We get very good germination times, and we find that the Terraseeding process has given us the ability to seed earlier and seed later because the seed's in the right spot, it's protected. And you can see the growth here on that site. Again, kind of cross section of what it looks like, seed growing from underneath rather than just on top. And so this is like a 1-inch application, Eco Blanket application for erosion control. Again, would work the same way for turf grass or whatever. You're seeding 1 or 2 inches depending on the site and the soil conditions. Kind of the proof that it works, I guess. This is from a site, again, up in Whistler, a different site for the Ministry of Transport, and they were looking at it hydroseeded 2 years ago, 2 years in a row. So this is hydroseed in its second season, and they were just having problems with not only high runoff and lots of rilling and erosion, but just not enough nutrition in that soil. So they looked at, well, do we amend that soil? I mean, it's all steep slopes, all cut slopes. There's a 14-kilometer section of roadway, or do we look at the Eco Blanket? And so you can see the Eco Blanket on the left that was Terraseeded, and you can see the results. Interestingly enough, a different part of Terraseeding, but part of this sustainability thing is all the Eco Blanket was manufactured on site for the Olympic Games, the venues up in Whistler, that a project that we worked on. So we took all the land clearing, composted all that material on site, produced Eco Blanket, and then Terraseeded it and put it back on the slopes. Again, a look at Terraseeding versus broadcast seeding and some straw, which is pretty common in the erosion control construction side. We're using straw to try to control runoff. So just look at how different it is. Terraseeding, again, you got the right environment for growth. You've got a sponge really that's going to hold moisture where it needs to be for that vegetation, as opposed to the other. This is a site that needed to be repaired. Again, on the right-hand side, you see rolled blankets, hydroseeding underneath, rolled blankets over top, and you can kind of see the difference between the Eco Blanket on the other side. Kind of an aside, we've found we get a lot of, especially environmental consultants that are doing work in fisheries areas and that type of thing, who are wanting natives, either shrubs or flowers, and we found very good success with Terraseeding those hard to establish species because of the nutrition that's there and just much more predictable. So if you have sites where you're looking at seeding in riparian areas where you're wanting to put things like alder or elderberry or things like that are typically hard to establish, or wildflower, the Terraseeding process has worked very well for that for us over the last 5 years or so. Just some other products that we use. Compost in socks, we build walls with them. So just riparian areas where we did some vegetation establishment, again, we can inject the seed right into this product. So that's an overview of Terraseeding, and I hope that it wasn't too long. That was the point, is to just kind of make it quick and concise and kind of expose you, specifiers, landscapers, municipalities, to another way, another process for seed establishment. If you have questions individually that don't get answered, please don't hesitate to send us an email or drop us a line, and we're happy to answer that.